At 29, the night I graduated with my MBA, my parents handed me notarized papers at a steakhouse in Columbus, removing me from their estate and calling it tough love. 2 weeks later, my father signed a 5-year contract to save his collapsing manufacturing company, not realizing the founder sitting across from him was me. By the end of that same day, the trust he triggered transferred his Upper Arlington house into my control. My name is Lena Whitmore, and this is how being disowned in public turned into the most expensive mistake my family ever made. Chapter 1: The Night They Erased Me. The envelope made a soft sound when it touched the white tablecloth, a small, sliding whisper that somehow felt louder than the clinking glasses and polite laughter around us. We were in a steakhouse in Short North, Columbus, the kind with dim lighting and leather booths and a wine list thick enough to pass for a novel. My parents had insisted on celebrating my MBA there. It was May of 2021, and I was 29 years old. I had graduated from Ohio State University that morning. My mother, Elaine Whitmore, sat across from me in a cream silk blouse, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. My father, Richard Whitmore, 64 and still broad-shouldered in his navy blazer, leaned back in his chair like he owned the room. My sister, Vanessa, 36, corporate attorney out of Cleveland, had her phone resting upright against a water glass, angled just slightly toward me. At first, I thought she was checking emails. The waiter had just poured a second round of wine when my mother slid the envelope toward me. "This is something necessary," she said softly, "something that will help you grow up." I remember noticing how thick the paper felt even before I opened it. Cream stock, heavy, official. I expected a card, maybe a check. My father believed in symbolic gestures that came with conditions. Instead, I found 3 pages of legal text. Notice of removal from estate, an updated estate plan document reflecting amendments to the Whitmore family trust. At the bottom of the first page, I saw a notary seal. I read the first paragraph twice before the meaning settled into my bones. Effective immediately, I was removed as a beneficiary from my parents' estate and from any associated family trust allocations. Failure to uphold family legacy. Refusal to contribute to the family enterprise when requested. Pursuit of independent ventures contrary to the long-term stability of the Whitmore name. My sister cleared her throat in a way that was almost delicate. "This is legally sound, Lena. It has been reviewed and notarized. All you need to do is sign the acknowledgement of receipt so there is documentation that you have been informed." Documentation? That was when I noticed her phone was not face down, it was angled toward me. Not live streaming, not yet, but recording. For the file, I imagined she would say later. For clarity, for protection. My father set his glass down with measured precision. "You chose not to come into Whitmore Industrial when we needed you," he said. "You had an MBA in hand, and a company that has carried this family for 3 generations needed fresh leadership. Instead, you chased an app." "It is not an app," I said quietly. "Supply chain software is not legacy. Steel and contracts and payroll are legacy. You walked away from that." My mother folded her hands as if we were at church. "We are doing this because we love you, Lena. Tough love is still love. You need to understand that actions have consequences." Vanessa's voice came in cool and even. "This is not emotional. This is a financial decision. There is no anger here, just alignment." No anger. We were in a crowded restaurant celebrating my graduation, and my family had handed me legal paperwork erasing me from their estate, and my sister was filming it as evidence. I looked around. Other tables were laughing. Someone clapped at the bar. A couple in their 20s were taking photos in their caps and gowns. My family had turned my graduation dinner into a deposition. "You want me to sign," I said. "It is simply acknowledgement that you have received notice," Vanessa answered. "It does not change your rights beyond what the amendment already states." "Which rights would that be, exactly?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. You are no longer a Whitmore in any meaningful financial sense. That is what this states. In any meaningful financial sense. I felt something shift inside me. Not a crack, not a break, but a click. If I sign, I said slowly, does that mean I am no longer a Whitmore in any meaningful way? My father met my eyes. Family is a privilege, not a right. The waiter appeared at the edge of the table, holding our entrees. He hesitated, sensing the air had gone thin. My mother smiled at him as if nothing unusual was happening, as if this was just another polite dinner among well-bred people. Vanessa nudged the pen toward me. It is cleaner this way, she said. Cleaner. I picked up the pen. For a second, I imagined flipping the table. I imagined standing up and shouting that I had built something they had never bothered to understand. I imagined telling every table in the restaurant exactly what my family was doing. Instead, I signed, Lena Whitmore. My handwriting was steady. Vanessa leaned forward and adjusted her phone slightly, making sure the signature was visible. Thank you, she said, as if I had just agreed to split a check. My mother exhaled in relief. You will thank us one day. For what? I asked. For forcing you to grow up. My father reached for his wine again, the matter apparently concluded. We have given you every opportunity, Lena. If you want to build something, build it without leaning on this family name. There it was. They believed they had stripped me of leverage. They believed I had just lost something. They did not know what they had activated. I folded the documents carefully and slid them back into the envelope. You really like paperwork, I said. My sister gave me a faint smile. Paperwork is how the world works. I held her gaze for a beat longer than she expected. I agree. There was a flicker in her eyes then, just a flicker. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and picked up my purse. You're leaving? My mother asked, her voice suddenly strained. Dinner is over, I said. This is not a tantrum, Lena, my father warned. No, I said, it is not. I walked past the bar and out into the Columbus night. The air felt colder than it should have in May. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching cars move past High Street, feeling the noise of the city rush back into my ears. My phone was already in my hand. I called Arthur Chen. He picked up on the second ring. Well, he said, how did it go? They signed me out of the family, I said. There was a brief silence on the line, not surprise, just calculation. The amendment is notarized, he asked. Yes. And you signed acknowledgement? Yes. Good, he said. I leaned against a brick wall and looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant. They think they erased me, I said. Arthur's voice softened, but only slightly. Then they just triggered what your grandmother put in place. I closed my eyes for a second. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel crushed. I felt like someone who had just stepped off a cliff and realized she wasn't falling. Tomorrow, Arthur said, we move forward. We let contracts and numbers speak. No speeches, no revenge. I watched my father's silhouette through the glass as he stood up from the table, already talking with his hands, already rewriting the story of what had just happened. They wanted control, I said, quietly. Then let us show them what control really looks like, Arthur replied. I ended the call and stood there for another moment, the envelope heavy in my bag. They had tried to cut me out of their legacy with paper and ink. They did not understand that paper and ink were the only weapons I had ever needed. Chapter 2. The Company They Never Saw. I learned that long before I ever signed my name at that restaurant table. People assume rebellion begins with a dramatic moment, a slammed door, a shouted declaration. Mine began quietly in 2017 in a small shared office space near downtown Columbus, when I decided I would not go back to Whitmore Industrial after finishing my MBA. My father had expected it. It was never formally stated, but it was understood. I would study, sharpen my mind, then return to the factory floor that smelled of oil and steel and decades of pride. I would modernize operations, preserve legacy, carry the Whitmore name forward. Instead, I walked into a co-working space with peeling paint and rented a desk by the window. Hale Systems started as a spreadsheet and a theory. The theory was simple. Mid-sized manufacturing companies were running on outdated software, fragmented systems, and manual reporting that cost them money they could not afford to lose. If I could build a platform that integrated inventory, procurement, and predictive demand modeling in one place, I could solve a real problem. The name Hale did not come from branding consultants. It came from my grandmother, Nora Hale. Hale was my mother's maiden name before she became a Whitmore. My grandmother had never changed her tone to match my father's. She had once told me in her quiet kitchen, "You do not need permission to exist." That sentence stayed with me longer than any lecture on legacy. Arthur Chen had been a guest speaker in one of my MBA classes. 62 years old, retired from IBM, sharp without being loud. After class, he asked why I had challenged his assumptions about supply chain risk modeling. I told him because the models were outdated. He laughed and asked if I wanted coffee. That coffee turned into seed funding. In 2018, we raised $750,000, not from flashy venture capitalists in California, but from 2 angel investors in Ohio who understood factories and freight routes. The check did not feel glamorous. It felt terrifying. It meant people believed in a spreadsheet that barely worked. I remember the first time our beta crashed during a live demo. The screen froze and I kept talking as if nothing was wrong, while Marcus Hale, our operations lead who joined in 2019, tried to restart the server from the back room. I remember a night in early 2020 when payroll was due and we were short by $3,000 because a client had delayed payment. I covered it from my personal savings and pretended it was routine. When the pandemic hit in 2020, supply chains snapped like overstretched wires. Suddenly, the problem I had been pitching for 3 years was not theoretical, it was urgent. Companies could not track materials, lead times doubled, factories lost contracts because they could not predict delays. We closed a Series A round of $4.2 million that fall. I did not celebrate. I went back to my laptop and rewrote onboarding documents. Through all of it, my parents maintained a careful distance. They never asked for details about Hale Systems. They referred to it as my project. Once at Christmas in 2019, my father had said, "When you are ready to come back to something real, the door is open." Something real? The first time I realized they were not just indifferent, but actively undermining me was in early 2021. Olivia Kent, my closest friend since college and now an HR manager at a regional firm, called me after work. "You need to see something," she said. She had a contact in an administrative office tied to a scholarship fund I had applied for during my MBA. The email had been sent from my mother's account and copied my father. It expressed concern about my emotional stability and suggested I might be under significant stress that could affect my judgment. Concerned parent language, polite, strategic. I read the forwarded copy on my phone while sitting in my car outside our office. Olivia waited for me to say something. "I'm fine," I told her. I knew that tone. It was the same tone my mother used when she said tough love. I did not confront them. I did not forward the email. I filed it away mentally, another piece of paper in a long stack of evidence that control, for them, was a moral right. By the spring of 2021, Hale Systems had grown to 23 employees. We had clients across Ohio and into Indiana. We were not flashy. We were stable. And then Arthur walked into my office one afternoon with a thin folder in his hand and a look I recognized. "We passed due diligence," he said. "For which one?" I asked. He sat down across from me. "The large manufacturing client in Ohio, the one we've been courting for 3 months. 5-year SaaS agreement, annual licensing fee just under $800,000, plus implementation." My pulse quickened by myself. "Who are they?" I asked. "Confidential until final review, but I can tell you this. They're in trouble. Revenue has dropped from $28 million in 2015 to around $17 million last year. They lost 3 major contracts. They're close to breaching a loan covenant with their bank." I stared at the numbers in the summary sheet. Inventory misalignment, delayed shipments, manual reconciliation across departments. I knew that pattern. It looked like Whitmore Industrial. Arthur watched my face carefully. "You recognize the profile?" he said. "Say it," I told him. He did not hesitate. Whitmore Industrial Fabrication. For a moment, the room felt too small. My father's company, the place where I had grown up walking factory floors in steel-toed boots during summer breaks, the place that had decided I was not worthy of its name 2 weeks earlier. "They reached out through a consultant," Arthur continued. "They're desperate for operational overhaul. They don't know you're involved beyond your title on the website." I leaned back in my chair. "Do they know I'm the founder?" I asked. "They know the founder's name is Lena Whitmore. Whether Richard made the connection is another question." I let out a slow breath. "We could walk away," I said. "We could," Arthur agreed, "but we'd be walking away from one of the largest contracts in our history because of emotion." "This is not about revenge," I said. "It's about business," he replied. That was the line I held on to. Daniel Brooks joined us the next day. 38, commercial attorney in Cleveland, meticulous without being dramatic, he laid out the draft contract across the conference table. 5-year term, exclusivity clause regarding core logistics software, early termination penalty equal to 3 times the annual licensing fee in the final contract year, standard confidentiality and data protection language. This is enforceable. It will also go through their board for review. "We're not setting traps," I said. He looked at me evenly. "We are setting terms. If they breach exclusivity or attempt to terminate without cause, there are consequences. That's how contracts function." I nodded. "Send it for their review." In the days that followed, the irony settled in slowly. My father had cut me out of his estate for refusing to join his company. Now his company needed mine to survive. We received their red lines. Minor adjustments, clarifications on service level agreements, nothing that touched the penalty clause. That meant the board had approved it. Arthur forwarded me the final meeting schedule, June 2021. Whitmore Industrial Headquarters, implementation kickoff and contract signing. I stared at the calendar invite for a long time. There was a version of me from 5 years earlier who would have walked into that building hoping to prove something personal, to make my father proud, to show him I was not reckless or unstable or misguided. That version of me no longer existed. I closed my laptop and stood up. "He's looking for someone to save his company," I said to Arthur. "And," he replied, "he doesn't know he already told her she was not worth saving." I looked out the window at the Columbus skyline. "When I step into that building," I said, "I'm not going as his daughter." Arthur nodded once. "You're going as the CEO." The meeting was set, the contract was ready, the board had signed off on language that bound them as tightly as it bound us. All that remained was to walk into a room where I had once been invisible and take my seat at the table. Chapter 3: The Boardroom. The morning of the meeting, I drove north toward the Cleveland area with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart moving at a pace I refused to measure. Whitmore Industrial Fabrication sat in a low, wide building of brick and steel, the same structure I had visited as a teenager when my father wanted to show me what real work looked like. The parking lot was half full. A few employees in reflective vests crossed toward the loading dock. Nothing about the outside suggested the quiet panic happening inside the boardroom. Arthur met me in the lobby. He wore a gray suit and the expression of someone who had already calculated every outcome. "You ready?" he asked. "I have been ready since 2017, I said. He gave a slight nod and led the way upstairs. The conference room was larger than I remembered. Polished table, framed photographs of old factory milestones lining the walls. Tom Bellamy sat at the head, posture straight, a folder open in front of him. Claire Whitman sat to his right, glasses low on her nose, pen poised. My father stood near the window, speaking to someone from finance. He turned when Arthur entered. "Arthur Chen?" he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you again." "Richard Whitmore," Arthur replied, firm but cordial. My father's eyes moved past him, scanning the hallway behind us. He did not expect me yet. We took our seats as the meeting began. Arthur opened with a concise summary of Hale Systems: integrated logistics, predictive analytics, real-time tracking. He did not oversell. He let the data speak. Implementation timeline, projected efficiency gains, case studies from 2 mid-sized manufacturers in Ohio. Tom Bellamy leaned forward. "What are the risks during transition?" he asked. "Downtime, data migration errors?" Arthur answered calmly. "Minimal downtime if the phased rollout is followed. We assign a dedicated team during the first 90 days. The founder will oversee initial implementation to ensure alignment." Claire Whitman tapped her pen. "The founder will be present in person?" she asked. "Yes," Arthur said, "as listed in your agenda under implementation kickoff." My father glanced at the printed agenda in front of him, brows knitting slightly. He had skimmed it. He had assumed founder meant someone else. He shifted the conversation. "We are not here to admire software," he said. "We are here because we need operational reform. Our margins have tightened. We need a partner who understands manufacturing culture, not just theory." Arthur inclined his head. "That is precisely why Hale Systems exists." My father continued, warming to his own speech. "Innovation is not about abandoning legacy, it is about strengthening it. I have spent my life building Whitmore Industrial. I am prepared to work with the right minds to secure its future." He paused, then added, almost casually, "I have seen what happens when young people chase ideas without understanding discipline. I wish my own daughter had half the practical business sense of the founder of this company." The words landed in the center of the table. For a split second, no one moved. Claire Whitman's eyes flicked toward him, then toward the door. Arthur did not react. Tom Bellamy cleared his throat. "Let us proceed to the final review before signing," he said. There was a knock. I did not rush. I stepped inside at the pace of someone who belonged there. Heads turned. I walked to the empty chair beside Arthur and placed my folder on the table. "Good morning," I said. Richard's face changed in stages: recognition, confusion, calculation. "My name is Lena Whitmore. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Hale Systems. I will be overseeing your implementation personally." Silence spread across the room like spilled ink. Tom Bellamy looked from me to my father. "Whitmore?" he repeated. "Yes," I said. Claire Whitman did not look at me first. She looked at Richard. "Is this the daughter you referenced?" she asked evenly. Richard's jaw tightened. "This is a personal matter," he said. "It appears relevant to governance," Claire replied. Arthur slid the final contract copies forward. "We are here to finalize terms approved in your prior review," he said. Tom adjusted his glasses. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "do you foresee any conflict of interest given your relationship to our CEO?" "No," I answered. "Hale Systems operates independently. We adhere strictly to contractual terms and board oversight. Personal history does not alter performance metrics." Richard spoke then, more sharply than before. "This is unnecessary theatrics." "There are no theatrics," I said calmly. "Only deliverables." I could feel every eye on us, waiting to see who would blink first. Tom broke the tension. "We are close to breaching our loan covenant," he said bluntly. "We need operational improvement. The board has reviewed the contract language. The founder's identity does not invalidate projected efficiencies." Claire nodded. "The exclusivity clause remains as drafted. 5-year term, early termination penalty equal to 3 times the final annual licensing fee." Daniel Brooks, seated at the end of the table, spoke for the first time. "Correct. Those provisions are standard for long-term enterprise software agreements of this scale." Richard's gaze cut to me. "You designed this contract knowing it would bind us," he said. "I designed it knowing it would protect both parties. We perform, you pay. If either side breaches, there are consequences. That is how contracts function." Tom looked at Richard. "Do you object to the terms your legal team already approved?" Richard hesitated. "No," he said finally. He signed. The sound of pen against paper felt heavier than the signature I had placed in that restaurant weeks earlier. I signed after him. Arthur followed. Daniel gathered copies and slid them into neat stacks. It was done. The meeting shifted to implementation logistics, timelines, data transfer schedules, assigned teams. Professional language filled the room again, but something fundamental had changed. My father no longer controlled the narrative. As the board members filed out, Claire paused beside me. "Congratulations on your company," she said quietly. "Thank you," I replied. Richard remained seated. When the door closed, he stood. "You could have told me," he said. "About what?" I asked. "About this, about your involvement." "I told you for years that I was building something," I said. "You chose not to look." He shifted his head. "This is not how family handles business." "This is exactly how business handles business," I answered. I left before the conversation could collapse into something smaller. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone was vibrating. It was a number I recognized from estate documents. I stepped into my car and answered. "This is Margaret Ellis, the trustee attorney for the Hale Trust," the voice said. "I wanted to confirm that we have received a notarized copy of the formal disinheritance executed in May by your father." "Yes," I said. "Under the terms established by Nora Hale in 2015, the trust condition has been satisfied. You have been legally removed from your immediate family estate by notarized amendment. Effective immediately, management authority over trust assets transfers to you." I closed my eyes for a second. "Including the property in Upper Arlington," she continued. "Current market valuation is approximately $1.8 million. We will issue formal notice to the occupants. They will have 30 days to arrange transfer of title and discuss any potential lease agreement under revised terms." My father had signed his own amendment in a steakhouse, confident he was protecting legacy. He had not read the clause that connected his action to my grandmother's trust. I had signed acknowledgments of receipt, nothing more. The law had done the rest. "Thank you," I said. When I hung up, I did not laugh, I did not cry. I started the engine and drove back toward Columbus. That evening, I placed 2 folders on my desk at Hale Systems: the executed contract with Whitmore Industrial, the trust transfer documents from the Hale Trust. On paper, my father had tried to erase me from his future. On paper, he had secured my authority over a house that had symbolized his control for decades. I ran my hand lightly over the top page of each folder. Power had never been about raised voices in our family. It had always been about signatures. Now, the signatures were mine. Chapter 4. When Control Slips. The ink had dried, but control does not disappear quietly. By early 2022, Whitmore Industrial was deep into implementation with Hale Systems. Our team was on site twice a week. Marcus Hale oversaw data migration, Arthur monitored integration timelines, and I handled executive alignment calls. On paper, everything was functioning. On the surface, it looked like a partnership. Underneath, pressure was building. The first sign came through Daniel Brooks. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "They are asking for an amendment," he said. "On what grounds?" "Economic hardship. They want to renegotiate the annual licensing fee. They are claiming the terms are burdensome given current market volatility." I leaned back in my chair. "We priced based on their disclosed financials and projected efficiencies," I said. "Nothing has changed in the contract." "Correct," Daniel replied. "This is not a legal argument, it is a pressure tactic." It did not surprise me. My father had always believed rules bent for those confident enough to push. We drafted a formal response, polite, direct. The contract was binding. Any amendment required mutual consent. Performance metrics were being met, no basis for fee reduction. 2 weeks later, Marcus came into my office without knocking. "They are testing another system," he said. "What do you mean?" "We received access logs that show parallel data mapping through a third-party vendor. That violates exclusivity." My chest tightened, not with panic, but with focus. "Confirm it," I said. He did. Whitmore Industrial had quietly engaged a lower-cost software provider, hoping to build leverage. If they could demonstrate redundancy, they might argue for termination. I called Daniel immediately. "This triggers breach notice," he said. "Under Section 9, exclusivity violation allows us to enforce corrective action and potentially accelerate penalty if not cured." "I send the notice," I said. The letter went out that afternoon. The next board meeting at Whitmore Industrial was not something I attended, but I heard about it from Tom Bellamy. He called me directly, which he had never done before. "Miss Whitmore," he began, voice measured. "This exclusivity issue was not disclosed to the board prior to engagement. We are reviewing internal authorization procedures." "Understood," I said. There was a pause. "You should know," he continued, "we take breach exposure seriously. We are already under scrutiny from our lender." In other words, my father had created a second vulnerability while still trying to recover from the first. A week later, Richard requested a direct call. I considered ignoring it. I did not. We met in a neutral conference room at Hale Systems, glass walls, no portraits of factory founders. "You did not have to escalate this," he said, as soon as the door closed. "You breached exclusivity," I replied. "We were exploring options. You signed a 5-year contract." His jaw tightened. "You are enjoying this," he said. "No, I am enforcing terms." He stepped closer. "You are my daughter. I am your vendor," I said. The words hung between us. He shifted tactics. "The bank is watching. If this turns into litigation, it hurts both of us." "It hurts the party that breached," I said calmly. "Cure the violation. Terminate the third-party vendor. We proceed as agreed." He stared at me as if trying to locate the girl who once sought his approval. "You do not recognize me," he said. "I never did," I replied. The breach was cured within 10 days. The third-party contract was terminated. Our implementation continued. But the board had taken notice. Tom Bellamy informed me that oversight on executive decision-making at Whitmore Industrial was being tightened. Major vendor engagements now required direct board awareness. Richard retained his title, but not his unchecked authority. Control had shifted, not dramatically, but measurably. At the same time, consequences began stacking outside the boardroom. My mother called once in early spring. "I have stepped down from the Heritage Women's Foundation," she said abruptly. I waited. "They felt it was best given recent attention." Attention meant whispers. It meant that in Columbus circles, people had begun to connect the dots. A public disinheritance, a boardroom revelation, a trust transfer. No scandalous headlines, just quiet awareness. "I'm sorry you are uncomfortable," I said. "I did what I thought was right," she replied quickly. That sentence again, the shield of good intention. Vanessa's consequences were less subtle. The ethics inquiry initiated in late 2021 reached resolution in 2022. The Ohio bar found misuse of firm resources tied to personal matters and questionable conduct around documentation. She was suspended for 6 months. She called me once during that period. "You filed something," she said without greeting. "I did not file a complaint," I answered truthfully. "Someone did." "I can't control what people do when they see patterns," I said. Her voice cracked, just slightly. "You think you're above this now." "I think actions have consequences," I replied. Silence filled the line. She hung up first. By mid-2022, Hale Systems had stabilized as Whitmore Industrial's primary logistics platform. Their efficiency metrics improved, inventory shrink decreased, reporting cycles shortened. On paper, the partnership worked. Emotionally, nothing was resolved. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter, not typed, not notarized, my father's handwriting, tight and controlled. He asked to meet without attorneys, without board members, without context. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in a small coffee shop in downtown Columbus, neutral ground. He looked older, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. "I did not anticipate the trust," he said after a few minutes. You signed the amendment, I replied. I did not think your grandmother would structure something like that. You did not think she believed in me. He exhaled slowly. We were trying to protect you. From what? Failure. I held his gaze. If Hale Systems had collapsed, would you have welcomed me back without conditions? He did not answer immediately. We would have helped you, he said finally. With rules, I said. He rubbed his forehead. You were building something impressive, I will admit that. It was not an apology, it was not a recognition, it was an assessment. I do not need admission, I said quietly. I need boundaries. He looked confused. Boundaries? He repeated. You do not get to erase me and then reinsert yourself when it's convenient. He leaned back in his chair. So this is it, contracts and silence. This is clarity, I said. After that meeting, I began seeing Dr. Melissa Grant, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand why part of me still flinched when my father spoke. In her office, she asked a simple question. What would it mean if he never approved of you? It would mean nothing changes, I said. She nodded. Then perhaps your work is not about winning, it's about separating. That word settled deeper than revenge ever had. By the end of 2022, Whitmore Industrial was operating under tighter board oversight. My mother had retreated from public committees. Vanessa was rebuilding her career slowly. Hale Systems was profitable. On the surface, it looked like I had won. But what I felt most clearly was not victory, it was distance. The control my father once held over my future had slipped, not because I destroyed him, but because I stopped negotiating with his definition of me. I drove home one evening past the house in Upper Arlington that now technically fell under the Hale Trust. Lights were on inside. My parents were still living there under temporary terms. I did not stop. There would be more decisions ahead, more paperwork, more consequences. But for the first time, none of them required me to ask for permission. Chapter 5. The Name I Chose. Growth does not arrive with applause. It arrives with spreadsheets, late nights, and decisions that no longer shake your hands. By the end of 2023, Hale Systems had crossed $12 million in annual revenue. The number mattered, but not in the way headlines make it seem. It meant payroll was steady. It meant clients renewed contracts without hesitation. It meant our systems did not collapse under pressure. It meant the thing I built in a rented co-working space in 2017 had become something real. Arthur Chen stood in my office one evening as we reviewed projections for the next year. This is sustainable, he said. Not hype, not luck, sustainable. Marcus Hale leaned against the wall, arms folded, smiling in that restrained way he had when he did not want to jinx anything. We could go public, he said quietly. The idea had hovered around us for months. Investment bankers had begun circling, analysts asked careful questions, our legal team ran audits that felt like interrogations. Going public meant more paper, more scrutiny, more signatures. It also meant scale. In early 2024, we filed the paperwork. The process was not glamorous. It was controlled, methodical, exhausting. I sat through meetings about disclosure language and risk factors. I signed documents that described our vulnerabilities in precise legal terms. I approved filings that stripped our story of emotion and reduced it to numbers and liabilities. On the morning of the IPO, I stood in New York under lights that were too bright and too cold to feel celebratory. Hale Systems flashed across digital screens. Our name was no longer confined to Ohio. Arthur stood to my right, Marcus to my left. Olivia Kent had flown in from Columbus and squeezed my hand before we stepped forward. "You did this," she whispered. "We did this," I corrected her. When the bell rang, the sound was sharp and undeniable. I did not think about revenge. I did not think about my father sitting in a boardroom 2 years earlier. I thought about every time someone told me what was realistic for a Whitmore daughter. The market responded. Analysts wrote summaries. Our stock opened steady. But the real shift happened later that year, in a quiet courthouse in Ohio. I filed to change my name. The clerk barely looked up when she handed me the form. Name changes are not dramatic in America. They are processed like everything else. You fill in the blanks, you state your reason, you wait. Reason for change, the form asked. I wrote that I wanted my legal name to reflect my maternal lineage and personal identity. The judge who reviewed it asked a single question. This is voluntary? Yes, I said. He stamped the order. Lena Hale. The first time I saw it printed on official documents, something inside me aligned. Not because I was rejecting my parents in anger, because I was choosing something for myself without negotiation. Hale was my grandmother's Nora's name, the woman who told me I did not need permission to exist, the woman who structured a trust in 2015 that activated when my father tried to remove me from his estate, the woman who saw me long before I saw myself. The Upper Arlington house had already transitioned under the Hale Trust. My parents had moved out the previous year, not dramatically, but inevitably. They downsized, they adjusted. The house sat empty for a short time. When the trust attorneys asked what I intended to do with it, I had already decided. I partnered with a nonprofit in Ohio that provided housing and support for young adults who had been rejected by their families. Not the dramatic cases that make headlines, the quiet ones. The kids who were told to pack a bag, the ones who couch surf and pretend everything is fine. We renamed the property Hale House. The dedication ceremony took place in September 2024. Folding chairs lined the lawn. A simple banner hung near the entrance. Volunteers stood near the door, nervous and hopeful. I stood at a small podium and looked at faces that did not know my history. I did not speak about contracts. I did not mention estate amendments or boardroom silence. I spoke about boundaries. I said that family should not be a system of leverage. I said that being cut off does not mean being cut down. I said that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose not to return to a place that once defined you. The applause was soft and sincere. Across the street, a car idled for a moment before pulling away. I did not need to confirm who was inside. By 2025, I was 33 years old. Hale Systems had expanded beyond Ohio. Our leadership team was stable. Our board meetings were measured and strategic. I no longer felt like I was building in reaction to anyone. That spring, I attended an industry conference near Cleveland. Manufacturing executives, supply chain analysts, investors, the kind of room where my father once felt untouchable. I saw him near the back of the reception hall, holding a drink he did not sip. His posture was less rigid than I remembered. His hair had thinned. His confidence seemed quieter. He noticed me and hesitated, then walked over. "Lena," he said. "Richard," I replied. His eyes dropped to my badge. "Lena Hale," he read. "Yes." He cleared his throat. "I heard about the house. It is being used," I said. "For charity? For stability?" He nodded slowly. "Your company is doing well." "It is," I answered. A long silence settled between us, the kind that used to terrify me, the kind that used to make me scramble for reassurance. "You changed your name," he said finally. "I did." "Why?" I met his eyes without hostility. "Because I wanted a name that was not conditional." He absorbed that. "We made mistakes," he said. The words were close to an apology, but not quite there. "Your mother misses you," he said. I considered that carefully. "Does she miss me?" I asked, "or does she miss the version of me she could manage?" He had no answer. He nodded once, a small, tired motion. "I should get back," he said. I stepped aside so he could pass. There was no dramatic ending, no raised voices, no reconciliation scene fit for television, just two adults standing in the space between what was and what would never be again. Later that afternoon, I left the conference and stopped at a coffee shop nearby. The place was crowded with attendees wearing badges and talking about margins and forecasts. I ordered a black coffee and waited near the counter, checking a message from Marcus about a new contract. The barista called out my name, Lena Hale. I stood still for a second, not because it hurt, not because it felt triumphant, because it felt true. I walked forward, took the cup, and stepped outside into the mild Ohio air. Cars passed, conversations hummed, the world moved on without ceremony. Years earlier, my family had tried to erase me with a notarized amendment and a dinner bill. They believed paper defined power. They were right about one thing: paper matters, but so does who holds the pen.